I'm Jen West, professional rebel of delight.
And I'm Dave Wiesdock, sage of creative scaffolding.
And this is shadow casting. Hey everyone, welcome back to our shadow casting podcast. Last week we had a discussion on beliefs versus knowing. And we did a deep dive on that where we talked about beliefs really being the certainty we have without a lot of experience in it. It's just something in our head that we know that we have decided is true, versus knowing is experiential and the piece of us that moves through life experiencing things, and we start to realize there are things we know and there's a lot of stuff we don't know. And we put those things together in a framework of what we call the seeker mindset, which is a part of a seeker archetype. And we did our deep dive into knowing and believing last week. And this week, we really want to dive into what it means to live that seeker mindset without letting it become something destructive in our lives. So yeah, we're really excited because we couldn't believe how deep we went into believing and knowing that we just only highlighted the seeker at any one time. So this week, we're jumping back in. It's going to be more focused on the seeker and how to live that and not make it a destructive quality.
Yeah, I really can't wait to dive into this. I think that going over the nuance of belief versus knowing was essential to this part. Like, it was almost like a preamble to discussing the seeker, because the seeker is such a nuanced archetype. We were just talking about it before we recorded. I used to have the seeker, and then I've kind of shifted it to more of an explorer archetype, whereas the seeker has become more poignant for where you are at your journey. And I really believe that this is something that comes down to the fact that you and I continue to explore our knowing and what's kind of true for us, and leaning into this archetype that we're going to talk about today. And that has opened up for us how this shows up in our lives. And so I'm really excited to share with the audience how to take this sort of differentiation between belief and knowing, and how to step into that knowing in a sort of archetypical sense to give you an energy of for yourself of if you're in knowing or not, because it's tricky. Belief is, I want to say, almost insidious. Like, it seeps in. We don't know the beliefs we don't know, right? Sometimes we say I believe in X or I believe in Y, and then other times there's a belief that's sort of like more unconscious, that's deeper, that comes from society or culture or things that we picked up that we just accepted as a belief, and so it sort of drives us. And for me, stepping into the seeker energy is conscious driving of our lives.
Yeah, and even the seeker sometimes has beliefs, but they recognize them as beliefs and they don't force them out. They're kind of testing them. They're like, there's a belief I have. Now it's time to go explore it. And it's kind of this exciting thing where it's like, is that real? Or is that just something? Yeah.
And I think you're hitting the nail on the head here, because that really is the difference, right? We're not saying that belief versus knowing one is better or worse than the other. What we're saying is that there's a difference. There's a different space you're coming from. And where I'm hoping we take the secret today is to show the audience, to explore knowing versus belief, you kind of got to tap into this energy. So, that's where I would like to take this today. And I'm excited for you to kind of show us where we're going with this.
Yeah, I'm super excited because the last episode, we really played with ideas and we were looking at how they felt. And we gave a whole bunch of examples to give a feeling of what it's like to believe and know. Last week, or last episode, we came up with the idea of a mechanic. And we said how a mechanic, if they were doing their job and then they decided to go somewhere else, they might be able to use those tools and tricks they learned as a mechanic to do something else. That knowing could be shifted and changed. And a piece that we didn't really dive into was identity around that. And I just want to put that in a little bit, because we decided that in that knowing of being a mechanic, there's also a belief, one of those hidden beliefs that Dave just talked about, that I am a mechanic. And if you have that belief, then you can't go outside and become that artist or the author because you are the mechanic. Instead of you have knowledge, you have a knowing of being a mechanic. The action, the beingness of life was the doing of it, the gaining knowledge of it, the wisdom of it that can transfer to something else. But if you're stuck in the identity and belief, then you are a mechanic and all you do is be a mechanic. And so that was just one little piece that we didn't really flesh out that I'd like to throw out there. If you have an identity in something that you do, can you rivel that out to what you know about it and then use it everywhere? Because that's one of the beauties of the seeker archetype is that it takes what it's learned and what it's experienced and transfers it everywhere.
Yeah. So I guess to kick things off, how would you define a seeker? Like, let's sort of introduce what a seeker is. It's what it is, what it isn't, maybe what its shadow side is. I think, for me, I see the seeker as there's two characteristics that stand out for me as a seeker. One is that they have a call to adventure and choose to jump into the unknown. And to me, this is very reminiscent of like the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, Hero with a Thousand Faces, that sort of motif of we all hear a call towards something that inspires us. And there's a courage and a willingness to jump into that unknown. But the other thing too is that the seeker is independent. That's the other side of this. In my own research and my own understanding for these podcasts, and as I've been experiencing what the seeker looks like, I really resonate with that independent part, almost in a, dare I say, melancholic way, because independent almost makes you feel a little lonely. And I don't, there's no way to really mince that. There is a bit of independence with being the seeker that might mean that you're hearing this call yourself. And so that's why I think there's a courage here that's needed, because in order to be the seeker and go and experience what you're feeling that call for, you sometimes might need to make choices that others don't understand because they're also not receiving that same call. And so the seeker can feel a little independent or isolating. And what happens then is one of two things, I think. And I'd love to know what your thoughts on this are, Jen. But for me, then this kind of creates this dualistic shadow side of the seeker. You hear the call, and then either you might double down on the seeker's quest. And so you're just seeking for the sake of seeking. You're going out, you're looking for the single truth, the one truth. And that becomes the end all be all. The other problem with the seeker is that you can just kind of get lost in the seeking and you're never really getting towards any sort of wisdom. And to me, that is the light side or the gift of the seeker, is the wisdom you get. And the wisdom, so there was always this nuanced saying that I used to learn, which is knowledge is given, but wisdom is knowledge plus experience over time. And
Yeah.
so wisdom is a very deep knowledge. And that comes from, for me, from that seeker mindset of that willingness to go out and learn, to experiment, to do some of the things we've talked about in our podcast, like sincerely playing, going out and learning your archetypes, seeing how you cast your own shadows, using life as your sort of arena to learn these things. But I'm rambling. What you got?
No, I agree wholeheartedly. It's really important for somebody who does start to play with the seeker mindset to know the things that are not on the right path and can lead you astray and really are the shadows of the aspect. And that one truth, finding truth, is is a downfall for a seeker because they've already decided there is a thing. And then it's a confirmation bias that comes in. They're playing that game of this is what I'm looking for. So I'm going to go find things that support that. Or I'm going to disregard anything that doesn't quite hit the nail on the head. And as Dave said, that also that seeker that just absorbs everything. It doesn't matter what rabbit hole it is. It's like a top layer almost. It's just very surface. I know a little bit about that, a little bit of that, and a little bit. And it becomes knowledge gathering instead of wisdom because nothing's really ever dove into, nothing's ever lived. It's just now I have this, now I have that. And they can pull it out of their head and talk about it, but they don't know it.
So, what you're sharing brings up another archetype, which is really interesting to me because I'm wondering if there is a sort of nuance here that we need to pick at. But I'm curious what you think. So, when you described that to me, the seeker isn't the archetype that came to mind, actually.
Mm.
What came to mind with that was the dilettante, the person that goes out. Their knowledge is a mile, what is it called? A mile wide and an inch deep, right? They know a lot of everything, but only a little bit of it. And
Yeah,
and
I think that one's the amateur, at least from
oh,
Carolyn Miss is the amateur where it stays. If I remember correctly, the dilettante is all about love. So it's
okay.
about loving the thing. And they don't have a deep knowledge. You're right. It's not deep, but they go for it because they love it. And the amateur seems to want just a lot,
A lot
but
of little things.
a lot of. I think that dilettante does have that jack of all trades
Vibe.
characteristic of them. Yes.
So either way though, how would we as the audience listening, how do you distinguish then if you're leaning more into this seeker-esque archetype versus a amateur or dilettante? Because you're right, there's some nuance there that is different, but there's also some overlap that I'm hearing. And so like how can one sort of pick at that?
That's a really great question. And from some of the research I did, the seeker is someone who is evolving themselves. They are becoming better people. They are growing. At the highest level, they are seeking enlightenment and God. And so that's one way. It's like this earthly to unity, God, enlightenment, whatever your, you know, belief. I put quotes around it. It's that higher, more evolved human state. And the dilettante doesn't have that. But that can be a mistake when you start to think that grabbing from let's say it is religious based, grabbing from all religions and knowing all the religions and then deciding that they're all saying the exact same thing. I've been studying Qigong recently, and my teacher, he brought up the fact that you don't want to take something you already know and plaster it onto what you're learning. Let it be new. Don't go, oh, this is like that thing, because it can blind you to what it actually is. So it's an interesting thing. You want to let
That's
something be
fascinating.
itself. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was gonna say, part of my priority here has been about surrender refinement. And so going out and learning how to learn was part of that. And interestingly enough, one of the main techniques that they teach you is the exact opposite of that, which is to take something you already know and see how it applies to something else that you're learning, because it helps build the neural pathways in your brain to learn that material quicker. However, when I learned that, that was a concern of mine of what you just brought up, which is yes, it does help you learn maybe that perspective of this new thing, but it removes the ability to learn the wholeness of this new thing because you're applying and forcing something onto it that isn't originally part of its essence. And I like that because I think tying this all back together now, that's the difference with the seeker mindset, right? The amateur and the dilettante, and I'm roping these together just for sake of argument, but those type of archetypes are probably applying a scaffolding-esque energy around what they're learning because it helps them learn it quicker because they're not trying to learn it a mile deep. They're just trying to get the essence of it. Whereas the seeker mindset, which I think we're about to dive into here, is almost a reverse of that or antithetical to that, where it's like the seeker is going out to experience this new thing. It isn't just about learning it, it's about completely embodying whatever they're going out to learn.
And I think it helps if you have a teacher who knows that thing too, because otherwise you do need other life experiences to filter onto things. But it's a skill to step back and allow yourself to just be a beginner, to have never done it and to experience it as it is. And then maybe after being in it, then seeing if it matches something else or where it does and where it doesn't. And that's the nuance. That's the wisdom that the seeker comes to because they start to see the connections and then where there aren't connections, where there's difference. And that nuance is the power.
Yeah. So you could almost say that, like, for the seeker mindset, it's about kind of where your focus is and not, not. It's about knowing where your focus is and making a conscious choice of how you are engaging with that focus.
Exactly, Dave. We're talking about, if you go back in our podcast, purpose. And if you have listened to that podcast, we say purpose is something that was already in you, already a part of you your entire life. And it's just recognizing it, making it conscious, and living it powerfully. And that's what we're talking about with the seeker. The seeker has found their purpose and they're going out and learning, they're going out and creating, and they're open to the world. And both Dave and I recently read The Alchemist. What's the author's name?
Uh,
Pablo.
Paulo Coelho.
Yeah. But The Alchemist, brilliant book. Read it. It's short, it's sweet, it's amazing. There's one part in it where they talk about what the secret of happiness is. And this boy comes to find out what happiness is. And the king gives him a spoonful of 2 drops of oil, and he's supposed to carry it around the castle and look around at the castle, keeping the drops of oil. And he goes through the castle first time, very, very focused on the oil, walking all around the castle, and but so focused on not spilling the oil. And the king asks him how he liked the castle, but the kid didn't see it. And so he sends him around again to look at everything in the castle. And he does, but then he forgets about the drops of oil, and there's no oil in the spoon. The king says the secret of happiness is to see all the marvels of the world and to never forget the drops of oil on your spoon. And this is staying focused on our purpose. This is driving our purpose and seeing everything we can as we take the adventure. That's what the seeker does. They don't lose sight of the adventure. They don't lose sight of the marvels. They don't lose sight of the possible wisdom that happens as you go on your journey. And you're still on a journey. You don't get sidetracked into something else.
I really enjoy The Alchemist for a lot of reasons, but for me, the main character, the boy, is really a great example of the seeker archetype. He embodies this idea because throughout the entire book, it almost gets a little repetitive for me as the reader. I noticed as I read this book, actually reread this book, he constantly brings up the idea of his personal legend, what he is seeking, his drop of oil. And he's able to go through all these experiences, whether he's at the crystal shop or the oasis or, later on in the desert. He kind of is the opposite of the story that I think it's the king shares, right? And so it's this idea that to be a successful seeker, the things that we go out and seek often add, and this is where the analogy sort of loses it for me, but I'm going to play with it anyways because it works in my brain. But for me, the seeker goes out and seeks the things that he enjoys, and those enjoying things fill up the spoon, the oil. They add to the spoon. That for me is another difference and nuance of the seeker. what the seeker goes out and chooses to pursue, as long as they are focused and on purpose and seeking their own happiness, many, many times, at least in my experience, what I've gone out and sought adds to and fulfills my drive as the seeker. Everything contributes back to that. And the opposite is true too. When I go out and I'm seeking things that aren't filling me up, that are distracting me and making me lose my spoonful of oil, those are equally important for me to pay attention to, because then that means I'm probably not quote unquote on the right track.
I think the boy always has a purpose he's driving to, whether it's his personal legend or not, but he does everything fully. He's in it for his purpose. So at one point, he learns to become a crystal merchant, but he also experiences it and watches life, and he interacts with that. And it's a great part of the book. It just really teaches us how to pay attention to our world and then change our world based on what we find in the skills we're doing. And the seeker does that. The seeker notices the world and then takes action based on what they've learned. They don't get stuck in pattern and doing the same thing over and over and over. They pay attention. And that's what actually gets them to, as the book calls it, the personal legend, or as we said, purpose. You have to keep growing. And that's what the seeker does. The seeker grows and the seeker learns and the seeker finds wisdom. But if you don't do that, if you get stuck, there are these things that can break us. And we talked about it. Belief is one of them. If we don't realize it's a belief, and that's where our downfalls are. So, what are some of those downfalls, Dave?
Yeah, so we call them the shadow side or the traps of the seeker, right? So the first one is the shadow side of the seeker itself. It's something I alluded to at the beginning of the podcast, which is this idea that there's a single source of truth. And I laugh at that because coming from the business world, that literally is what you or I focus on helping people build, is a database that is a single source of truth that they can come to, that is systematically built to have one answer for everyone. And I'm laughing on the podcast as I'm talking about this because now in this context, it sounds almost ludicrous to pursue something like that. However, that is the shadow side of the seeker. It's this idea that the truth is not only a single source, but that there's only one rote way to do it. And it sort of turns into this monotonous hamster wheel. You are constantly spinning your effort and spending your energy and getting nowhere. And this is also the sort of clue that I was talking about just a little bit earlier, which is if you aren't filling up if your oil spoon full of oil is getting spilt, this is that same kind of concept. If you are spending energy and time and resources and it is not taking you closer towards what you are seeking, then you are stuck in this trap. And I think that's your cue for this one. What about you, Jen? Are there are there shadow sides of the seeker or traps that outside of that we need to talk about, or what do you think about for the truth?
Truth is a sticky one because I think that's kind of where belief comes from in the first place. Is we want truth. We want something we can hold to deeply. But even with your business example, you can have that database, and as the world changes, you can decide that it needs to shift, right?
Yes, you can decide it shifts. And here's the crazy part. That's why I was laughing, because I see that database as a dynamic piece of information that is updated as it needs to. A lot of people build it as a static Bible almost, a set thing written in a certain period of time that will forever dictate how things are based around going forward. And that's just not reasonable. It's not feasible, and it's not the truth. The truth, let's bring up the alchemist again since we shared that quote. The boy, no matter where he was, even if in the book you felt like he was distracted, he was still pursuing his truth. He was still pursuing his personal life. The skills that he gained wherever he was all conspired in his favor to get to his personal legend, whether we as the reader or him as the boy knew it at the time or not. And that kind of gets me to the other part of this trap, which is, and I might need your help with this one, Jen, because this is something that I'm in right now a little bit. But the other half of this trap is that you don't always know when you're in the seeker path. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you've just got to go along for the ride. And that's why the seeker energy is about being open to the experience and not trying to come from belief. Because when we become from belief, would we try to apply something and scaffold something we already know onto something we're learning? We rob ourselves of the entire experience. And sometimes having that experience is exactly in its true essence is exactly what we need to continue our journey. And that's really tough.
It is. It's tough. It's leaning into uncertainty and not knowing and letting it come to us,
Yeah.
letting knowing slowly filter in and letting experience turn to wisdom. And that takes time and it takes consistency and it's slow. And if you're looking for truth, there's a focus that misses. It's like it wants to circumvent and skip
Yes.
the
Yes.
process, and the process is the important part. That's how you grow, that's how you become it, that's the amazing part of it. So yeah, the seeker is looking for truth too, they're just willing to take the journey.
Yeah. Yeah. They're open to the journey.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part. Do you want to talk about the sort of next kind of trap of the seeker?
Sure, yeah, one of my other favorite traps is that need to be right, and it's this idea of agreement or just opinion. It lives in opinion where you've gotten some context or some knowledge, some life experience, and you're looking for those who agree with you. And you start to suck yourself into a sounding board of people who say the same things you do, and you lose perspective and you lose the opportunity to learn. It's a crazy thing when we're like, I agree with you. I don't agree with you. So I'm going to go with the people I agree with instead of being like, why why don't you maybe it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they agree or not. So that's one thing a seeker keeps in mind. Is it useful? We talked about this briefly. Does it matter? Is it useful to our journey now? The other side is maybe there's something I can learn in my process from listening to the person I don't agree with. What is under their disagreement if I'm not oppositional, but curious?
There's a part I'd be remiss to not discuss here at this point, and that is when you are not in the seeker and sort of in this trap of agreement, there's another tall tale sign, in my opinion, and that is you start to get this sort of confidence, and it's a misplaced confidence because it's based in belief and not in knowing. And so it can be very misleading because this is that confirmation bias group think sort of mentality. And so this brings up another way that you know if you're on the seeker mindset, which is what I got on to at the beginning of the podcast about the independence. If you step out of the trap of needing to be right, of needing to find people that are an echo chamber for your ideas, you will start to find that the circle that you used to keep will shrink. And there's a very simple reason for this. Not easy, but simple. And the simple fact is that we as a social creature, as humans, as a society, as our humanity, we tend to gravitate towards people that share similar points of view with us because it makes us feel safe, it makes us feel seen, it makes us feel heard. And while there is nothing wrong or inherently wrong with that, the problem is that this is antithetical to the seeker. The seeker mentality is independence. It is about going out, being open, and learning. There is no right, there is no wrong, there is no good, there is no bad, there is no one correct belief because there really aren't any beliefs for the seeker, right? Everything is an open possibility. And so the seeker sort of becomes this rebel to the group thing. And so this trap isn't so much a trap of the quest, but a trap of comfort because you then become torn between, do you pursue your truth, which is uncomfortable and a little bit in the void and your uncomfort zone? Or do you stay in your comfort zone with the group think, the confirmation bias, what other people are sort of echoing in your beliefs, and you want to feel safe? And I'm not saying that being the seeker doesn't mean you won't find those things, but they are a little harder to come by.
Yeah.
And so,
And those people won't believe exactly what you believe, but they will value what you value. And you will have amazing conversations with these people because they get the idea of what it means to be a seeker, that it is a individualistic path. And the seeker, I think the seeker's quote is the Maya Angelou quote. You are only free when you realize you belong no place. You belong every place, no place at all.
I love that quote. I
It's
do.
it's one of my favorite quotes ever since Brene Brown brought it up in her book and brought it to life. Yeah, Maya Angelou is amazing with that quote.
So let's move on to the third and kind of other pitfall of the seeker, because for the second one, I think that quote just beautifully sums it up. That is sort of this need to be right. You can either actually, no, I'm just going to let it go because that quote, chef's kiss. Okay. So then there's this last sort of pitfall of the seeker. And again, this all circles around belief. And again, the idea is that the seeker is stepping out of belief and into knowing, not having knowing, but into knowing. One of the things that happens is that as we start to make these steps, we sometimes get information that we can't prove, but maybe that might be true for us or is true to our knowing. And sometimes the information we get isn't from us. It comes from other people. And we turn those things into belief. The other trap is clinging to things that aren't provable, things that aren't in the knowable experience of our shared experiences in humanity. Jen sort of hit on this with the last trap, which is you will find people that will be able to not necessarily have the exact same truths as you, but that will know where you are coming from on a deeper soul level than just what is being shared superficially. And I hate saying it like that because one of my things that always bothers me, and true to the seeker archetype, speaking of, is the idea that like there's this us versus them mentality. And I don't want to create that here. I'm not trying to say that you're either a seeker or not a seeker, or that you are a knower or a believer. We all oscillate between this. We are all on different levels and different scales with different things in our lives. Jen has, for example, helped me work on shadow stuff in my personal life, but that doesn't mean I don't have beliefs in other things that we haven't addressed or that I'm not even aware of. So it's not, I don't want to, I want to put a disclaimer or overemphasize here that we are all in varying levels of these traps. No one is perfectly out of all three of these traps. And so the idea is that as you start to become aware of them, don't go into judgment. Celebrate your humanity, honor that you're in this and that other people have gone through this too. And this is what I am getting at, is that when you share your truths with other people, whether they have the similar truth or not, they will know if you're at the deeper level because you will work through these traps first and you will come from a different level of experience that is shared, even if the truths are ultimately subjectively different.
Yeah, there's a language that shapes as you grow in your wisdom. And there's a lot more space for being wrong or being off the mark or where something really just isn't. It's just not, it's fantasy. And you can hear that in the language of somebody who has done the work. You'll hear a very experienced doctor who would say, I haven't done that and I haven't recommended to my patients, but based on what I know, it could work. Give it a try. That's wisdom.
Yeah.
They know that they don't know it all. They know what they do know, and they can put together, yeah, that might help. Go give it a try. I haven't seen it yet, but my, and then they could be like, "Mm, no, that's not how the body works. It just doesn't. Don't do that. It's not going to help you." And you can see it if you don't get that all the time. If they're always like, no, there's one right way. That person has not done the work. They're basing it either all on information or all on their own personal experience of things. And knowing is subjective. It really is. It's from our experience and it can grow, but knowing is subjective. And the seeker honors that. And their knowing grows and they can get with other people and can become more contained in a bigger picture. But what you've experienced is yours and it's subjective based on your personality, based on the archetypes you live, based on how much personal work you've done, based on the culture you grew up in. There's so many different pieces, and you have to honor that as a seeker.
Agreed. And so now tying that all together, that's how we get to this third trap, the trap of clinging to the improvable.
Yeah.
Because even in Jen's and mine, even in my knowing, I can't prove everything that I now have gained in my knowing in my own body wisdom. And I don't treat that as the truth above anyone else's experience. I am willing to experience something that is contradictory to something that I hold on to as a belief because I am open to the idea that there might be something else for me to know, something else for me to learn. The trap of this part of the seeker is that when we find a belief that just resonates so deeply with us, we over-identify with that part of this process and we get stuck. That's the difference. Because ultimately, and what I was talking about with another student is that all knowing came from wisdom first. Going with the sort of the mechanic example, the first person to make a car didn't have a manual to make a car. It came from within. It came from a knowing, an experience, trial and error, building it themselves. And then when someone said, prove it, they went and made it. That's what I think gets missed here in this overly information culture that we have now. We are so deeply connected that we are not experiencing anymore. We're abdicating to just other people's experiences and other people's knowing. And because we've read it once, therefore it is true for us. That is belief. That is clinging to the improvable. If something rings for you as our audience, lean into the seeker archetype. Go out and experience it. Go out and see if it's true for you. Not once, not twice, but forever, really. Yeah. The quest of the seeker is perpetual. It never ends. That's how you know if you're in belief. If you get to a point where you're holding on to something that you no longer need to experience, you just hold on to. I know where you're looking at me, and I don't know how to phrase it to get to what I'm trying to get to, but if you hold on to something.
Yeah, well, it made me think of becoming a horse trainer. That's what it made me think of. So I wasn't really looking at you. I was on the world.
Okay, so real quick.
Becoming a horse trainer. I had trained my horse, the one that I had raised, and I taught him stuff, and then I got somebody to teach me how to teach him better. And then I started working for a professional horse trainer. And he said, you need to ride a lot of different horses with a lot of different personalities, because the experience you have training your one horse with his personality is not going to work on every horse. The trial and error, that consistency, that difference. If you have an experience with something, go somewhere else, go to another country and test that experience there. Does it still hold true, or does the entire culture change everything?
Thank you for that example, because you just made me get to the succinct point I was trying to make, which is experience is the litmus test. Experience trumps knowing and belief. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that, because if you are in belief, experience will challenge your belief and you will cling to the belief. That is the trap. If you are in knowing and experience challenges your knowing, you update your single source of truth.
Yeah. Yeah, your knowing grows. And you want to make sure your experience isn't always the same. It can't be in the same environment. Like, I've done this 1,000 times in my hometown. No, that's not good enough. You have to go 1,000 places, you know, meet
Yeah.
1,000 people, ride 500 different horses, work on a whole bunch of different cars, play chess with 45 different people, you know? You want the experience to be different. And that's where knowing grows.
Yeah. So we sort of the last podcast, we really hit home the difference between belief and knowing. And I feel like in this podcast, we've highlighted why stepping into knowing is the secret archetype and some of those pitfalls. So now let's bring this home for our audience. Like, let's really highlight for them so they can become aware of what is the secret archetype? How does it show up for them in their lives? Like, what are some of these guideposts that they're like, okay, that's me tapping into my knowing or my seeker energy, my secret archetype. And I think succinctly putting it together is sort of the best way to do this. And really, it's this idea of the seeker has let go of belief and they're stepping into a process, the process of becoming them, becoming themselves. And as we've talked about, the seeker is independent. I won't say a loner because I don't know that that's necessarily true, but they are independent. There is a sort of energy of you need to go do this for you. And the other part of this is my favorite part because it leans into my value of the seeker isn't about certainty. The seeker is about questions. And I love when my seeker pokes me because now I've gotten to a point where when I'm working with anyone, literally anyone, actually, now as I'm thinking about this real time, I feel the seeker tap me on the shoulder because I'll be typing a statement or I'll be about to say something. And then my seeker will be like, hey, why don't you ask a question instead? Why don't you ask this? I'm like, well, yeah, but, and as soon as I start arguing with my seeker, the cause is lost, right? As soon as I'm like, well, yeah, but I could say that I've lost the battle. The seeker has won. He caught my attention. And 9 out of 10, it leads to a better conversation because I am no longer coming from what I believe that person needs to hear or know. And I'm coming from a space of, you go and seek it. You go and that's why it's independent. It's not that they're alone. They're not doing it on themselves. I'm still talking with them. We're still having a conversation, but I'm not telling them what to believe or what to know. I'm saying, hey, have you thought about this? Have you tried this experience? Just like when you were sharing, you experienced it once with one horse and someone said, hey, why don't you try experiencing it with this horse? Or maybe even in this country. Maybe horses in different countries are different. I don't know. Also, you trying to tame a horse on Chincoteague Island is going to be very different than a horse in, Colorado that's been sort of tamed, right?
100%. A wild horse versus a domesticated horse. I've never trained a wild horse. And yeah, I'm 100% certain it's incredibly different. There's already a relationship with a domesticated horse, whether they know something or not. Wild horse, oh, yeah, no, totally different animal.
Well, and so for me, the seeker is really this, and it's funny because I noticed the energy. I don't know if you've been picking up on this. As we've been doing this podcast, there's been very distinct rise and falls with the energy. And when we're in the seeker energy and in our knowing, there's a rise in the energy. There's a joviality with it. And when we start talking about belief, it's sort of like peters out a bit. Yeah. And for me, that's part of it because I laugh when the seeker pokes me now. When I tap into my value of curiosity and I'm asking a question, there's this sort of chuckle because there's a little bit of humility with it, like self humor. Who am I to think that I can tell you what to experience and know? Who am I? Literally, who am I?
Yeah. Not my purpose. You have to go do your own purpose. So
Yeah.
go seek. Yeah.
All I got really, really good at and what I continue to develop, because that's what kind of my personal legend is asking questions. I just get really good at figuring out what question to sort of get you out of your own trap because that's
Yeah.
all the seeker does. Once you learn the shadow side of the seeker, the flip side is the seeker helping you get out of your own traps.
Yeah. Out of your own way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's wrap this podcast up as a challenge for our audience. Kind of play with that idea of the seeker. Breathe into it. Are you coming from independence and curiosity and questions and allowing yourself to not know? to look at your experience and say, okay, I've experienced these things. Where is my knowledge lacking? Where is my experience? Where have I not gone with it that might be useful to my purpose? And just lean in to that archetype. And you'll come against belief. And when you hit one, decide first you'll have knowing that it is a belief. And then you can decide if it's useful. So you don't have to give everything up. You don't have to become an entirely different person. You're just bringing awareness to the energy and what it feels like when you're being a seeker and when you're in belief and opinion and being right and all of those traps. Anything else to add, Dave?
Yeah, so you're bringing up for me, Jen, some questions that I think our audience could ask in conjunction with this for themselves. They don't have to answer this to us, right, in the comments unless they want to. But this could help you sort of navigate if you're in belief or knowing. And it's 3 really easy questions. Is it practical? So in other words, is the belief or knowing that you have practical? Does it actually become something that you can implement in your day-to-day life? 2, is it useful? So in other words, just because you can implement it doesn't mean it's actually generative for you or doing something that generates you towards your own personal legend. And 3, is it real? Just because it's practical and just because it's useful, if it's not real, then it's a belief. If it's not real, you will argue for it. If it is real, then you are willing to experience it in whatever way it shows up and whatever way it challenges what you currently hold.
That's a beautiful way of phrasing it.
I learned from the best. So thank you for listening. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening from. Drop us a comment. We love hearing from our audiences. Give this podcast a like and be sure to share it out. Let other people experience what it means to be a seeker. And until next time,
See ya.